Hello and welcome to All You Can Board. I'm Carlo, and today I'm going to be doing a video talking about basically ranking the 6 games that I played solo at a cabin recently. So last weekend, or I guess by the time you see this, it might have been a couple weekends ago, I went out to my wife's kind of family cabin for the first time on my own. I brought a bunch of board games out there. I just kind of felt like I needed some time, some downtime, quiet time on my own. I wanted to play a bunch of these solo games. There are a bunch of games that I had at home that I had thought about bringing or wanted to bring. Stuff like Imperium Classics / Legends, which I haven't played yet, but I've heard there's some rulebook issues, and I don't have internet access out there, so I tended to leave behind games that, I might have needed, like, to use the internet to refresh on rules or get little clarifications. So it's not that these are by no means my favorite solo games or anything like that. This isn't like every weekend if I were to go out there, these are the ones I would bring, but this is a combination of some games that I was wanting to learn that I hadn't played yet, or games that I was really wanting to play solo specifically that might play at higher player counts. And if you've seen any of the videos that Dylan has done recently, like his monthly wrap-ups or like first impressions videos, I'm going to be ranking these. It's not just to say like 6 through 1, number 6 is the worst game and number 1 is the best. Like, I'm ranking these specifically on my experience that I had with them, like in that specific session at the cabin playing solo, and it's going to be factored into ranking based on 2 things. One is just like, what was that actual experience like that specific time? And secondly, how does the game play solo specifically is what I'm going to be looking at. So we'll probably talk more about a ton of other solo games in future videos. We'll probably do solo rankings that actually talk about our favorite solo games of all time and kind of stuff like that. But this is just kind of a fun discussion about what my experiences were like with these 6 games at the cabin. So with that out of the way, let's start right with number 6, and I will just say right now, I enjoy all these games. I would recommend all of them to anyone pretty much, and I like all of them. Like, I enjoyed all of them. I had a good time with all of them, so there's none that I had a bad time with. But the one that I would say I enjoyed the least would probably be Friday. So I've talked about this on the channel a couple times before. We actually covered it in an Own It, Play It, Skip It as a sort of mini review. This is designed by Freedom and Freeze, published by Rio Grande Games. This one, I think this is the only one I brought out to the cabin that is actually solo only. So there's basically it's a deck building solo game. I won't get too into the rules. I've talked about this on the channel a couple times before, but you're basically trying to build a deck, trash a lot of cards out of a deck. You're trying to get off an island. Your character ages. You add these cards into your deck that make him get older. If your character gets too old before you get off the island and defeat the pirates, you die. The game kind of ramps up and the difficulty of everything kind of scales as you go. So there's different difficulty levels, and this is probably my 4th or 5th time playing the game now, 6th time. So I initially tried it on difficulty, I beat it on difficulty 1, 2, and 3. I had lost a couple times in there as well. And then difficulty level 4 is where they say it's the real game. And I had not yet beaten it. I tried it a couple times on that difficulty and had lost each time. So I brought this out with the goal that, like, I'm going to pull this game out and I'm going to play it until I beat this on the hardest difficulty. So first try, I got absolutely demolished, like maybe like 6-7 turns in or something like that. I was losing way too much. One thing you can do in this game is when you're flipping over cards that are hazards, and you're trying to then flip cards over from this hazard deck, and you flip cards from your own deck to try and defeat the hazard. And there's a target like number that you have to get to with your cards, and if you fall short, you're basically losing life. You have a certain amount of life points. And whenever you lose life and you fail to defeat a hazard, you also can spend those life points. Instead of just discarding them, you can spend them to trash, like remove cards from your deck to thin out, so get rid of those bad cards. So yeah, the idea, like, I lost super early the first time. I set it up again and thought, okay, I'm going to try a little bit better this time, maybe a different approach. And I ended up beating it. It was very down to the wire, very close. I defeated the final 2 pirates. And then there's a way to calculate your score at the end. So depending how many hazard cards you didn't defeat that were left over in the pile, or however many aging cards you had left in your deck also lose you points. There's all kinds of stuff that you get kind of assessed on points. I got 57 points, and at the end, at the back of the rulebook, it says, "Can you reach 80?" So now I felt like, okay, well, I've finally beaten the game on the hardest difficulty, but now I haven't technically reached what is like the target score for the highest difficulty. I'm 23 points shy, I guess. So the reason why this is at the bottom of the list is just because, again, out of these 6 games, 2 of them were games I played for the first time. So a new experience a lot of the time is going to make a game like it's not going to mean the game is better, but it's just going to mean that even if I play a mediocre game for the first time, I might enjoy that experience more than playing a pretty good game for, let's say, the 20th time. And so I like Friday quite a bit. I don't think it's going to be a game that stays in my collection forever. And I think playing it there this time made me realize that I'm sort of maybe already nearing the end of my sort of plays with Friday. I don't know how many more times I'm going to play it now, because from game to game, other than just increasing the difficulty level, the way the game actually plays out doesn't feel different enough from game to game to make me want to keep playing it more and more. I think if I had been struggling more and had lost more and I had, really hadn't been able to beat it on that highest difficulty, I'd probably hold on to it a lot longer. I'll probably try it a few more times still to see if I can crack that 80 mark, and I'll probably let it sit for a while. But yeah, it was a great game. I still enjoyed it quite a bit, but there wasn't anything super memorable or very new about it, or I didn't have to make any plays that felt specifically really rewarding, or there weren't any really high points other than when I beat it and said, oh, that was awesome, I finally beat this on the highest difficulty. So yeah, that is Friday. Great little solo-only game, and it's fairly inexpensive, so I highly recommend you try it if you haven't. And yeah, that is, again, Friday. So next up is a game, actually, that I've also covered on the channel, also in an Own It, Play It, Skip It kind of mini review, and that is Hadrian's Wall. So this is designed by Bobby Hill and co-published by Renegade Games and Garphill Games. So this game technically plays 1 to 6 players. I've only ever played it solo, and as I mentioned when I kind of reviewed this, I don't think I would ever play it with more than 1 player. Maybe 2 players if 2 of us both knew what we were doing, like had played before. If someone really wanted me to show them the game, I'm sure I'd be okay with teaching someone else. But I mean, even 3 to 6, I don't think I would ever want to play this game. And even with 2, like, I'm never going to be the one to push to play with other players. It takes about an hour to play. Every time I've played, it's ended up taking a bit more than an hour, including like setup, a bit of a rules refresher. But it's basically a roll and write game where you have 2 giant sheets of paper and you're trying to defend this wall. So I won't get too into the rules because, again, I have talked about this on the channel a couple times before, and so has Dylan. When I did my Own It, Play It, Skip It review, I called this an Own It, and that's partially because I personally don't have any other roll and write games that are this heavy, and I guess technically this counts as a flip and write. There's no dice that you're rolling, but you're flipping cards and then using those resources. So I think it falls into the blank and write kind of category there, or genre. And I don't really have any that are this complex, this deep, that are this thinky, that have this much stuff going on the sheets, that I have to refresh on the rules as much. Like, this really does fill a niche in my collection that I don't have from any other games. And it feels like there's still, I've played this probably, I think, 6 times now or so, and there's still a lot to explore in terms of different paths to go down, prioritizing, one thing over the next, even increasing the difficulty. I think the first game or 2 I played was on easy, and since then I've been playing on medium. I have not tried playing it on hard mode yet. There's also like a campaign mode that the designer has made available on the Board Game Geek forums, which I definitely want to try out at some point, that gives you some more specific goals to try out and different things, just to kind of add some variety from game to game, just the way that a campaign would. So the reason why this is this low on this list for how much I like the game is just that this particular experience with Hadrian's Wall wasn't the greatest for me for 2 reasons. The first reason, which probably contributes to the second reason, but the first reason is this was the last game I played before packing up for the weekend. It was the morning I was leaving from the cabin, and the cabin next to ours, unfortunately, I was there from a Saturday to a Monday, and on Monday morning I woke up, I got out there with my cup of coffee and my breakfast, and I was, in the screened porch about to play Hadrian's Wall. The sun was rising. It was like the perfect setting. I got a few, into the second round or whatever, and then the cabin next to ours, there's construction going on. So then I was listening to drilling and sawing and loud rock music on the radio and people talking about materials and all this kind of stuff, and the game was already set up. I wasn't going to take it inside, so there was a lot of noise, a lot of distractions, and I'm going to blame it on that because I had by far my worst ever game of Hadrian's Wall. I think the lowest I'd scored previously was like 50 something, 53, 55, something like that, and I think I scored like 36 or 34. Awful game. And it also felt like I was just having the worst luck ever. It was like whichever, there was one, when you flip the cards, you flip these cards at the end of every round that show you which, you have basically 3 lanes of your wall. There's the left, middle, and right lane, and you're flipping these cards that's going to show you where the attacks are coming. And there's different parts on your sheet that you're marking off that are basically protecting against these attacks. And at the end of every round, you're drawing a certain number of cards, and it's going to tell you however many attacks get through, you're getting something called disdain on your sheet. And at the end of the game, there's this increasing scale where if you have too much disdain, you're going to lose a whole bunch of points. So you're trying to protect this wall, obviously. And it seemed like every round when I would try to, okay, I'm going to protect the middle and the right, and just hope that there's not as many cards on the left. And then I would draw the cards, and like 90% of the cards were attacks on the left. So all of the fortifying that I would do on certain parts of the wall, all the attacks were happening elsewhere. So it felt like everything that I was trying to do, I just kept getting super unlucky. There was one round where I drew, I think, like 9 attacks on the same side of the wall. And even though I had 4 or 5 defense there, like a bunch of attacks still got through. So it just felt like everything was going wrong. Between the distractions going on around me, feeling like, oh, I'm going to have to pack up for this game and head home right after this, and it's not going well, So anyways, I'll leave it at that. I still think it's a great game. I want to go back and play it a whole bunch more. I want to go back and play the campaign. So again, it's not that this is my second least favorite game of these 6 necessarily, but that particular experience just reminded me how difficult the game is, and also that, you know, I might not always want that type of, like, because this game for me is the ideal kind of Saturday or Sunday morning solo game with a cup of coffee. That's 95% of the time I'm going to play this game is going to be in that setting. And the fact that it's possible to get really bad luck and just get absolutely destroyed and feel like things aren't going well, I don't know if I would be then regret like spending hour and a half to playing that over a cup of coffee and then being frustrated. So I don't know. I'm wondering if my thoughts on Hadrian's Wall are slightly starting to change, or if it was just that one sort of negative experience with it that have kind of affected it a little bit. Still enjoyed it again, but yeah, anyways, that is enough. That is Hadrian's Wall, number 5 in terms of my weekend of solo games rankings. Next up, we're going to get into the first one here that is completely new to me. I bought this game a few months back and I hadn't got a chance to try it yet. That is Genotype, Mendelian genetics game. So this is co-designed by, well, there's 3 designers. It is John J. Coviu, Paul Solomon, and Ian Zhang, and is published by Genius Games. So for anyone not familiar with Genius Games, this is their, I don't actually know, I shouldn't have started saying that. This is at least their 3rd or 4th game. They had a game called Cytosis, which was, if not their first, maybe their 2nd game. This one came out in 2021, and then we recently also tried a game called Cellulose, which was a 2022 game by the same company, which Dylan talked about in a recent video. This is the first time we're talking about Genotype, but basically this company designs games that are always about some type of scientific field or some type of scientific process, and the games are always supposed to be very thematic, very educational, very sort of scientifically accurate, that kind of thing, but still be fun, challenging games that are still, you know, that aren't, yeah, I think they're supposed to still be, it's not just like, it's educational, but it's also a game. It's almost the other way, where it's a game, but they've managed to make it educational and thematic. So this one plays 1 to 5 players. The box says 45 to 75 minutes. I've only now tried the solo mode, so I can't really comment on how accurate that playtime is, but the basic idea of the game is it's based on, you know, real sort of historical events. Gregor Mendel in the 1800s, I believe it was like 1854 or something like that, built a greenhouse and started experimenting with pea plants. And so this game is kind of all about that process. You've got a big board. It's kind of worker placement, action selection type thing, where each player starts with 2 of these little shovel tokens that are sort of like workers. They're called action tokens in this game. And the game plays over 5 rounds, and every round has a few different phases to it. 3 phases, I believe it is. The first phase, you're going to be placing your action tokens on the board to kind of reserve spaces. The second phase, you're going to roll some dice, and depending on the results, you're going to place them on the board and then take turns drafting the dice, like one by one around the board. The players are going to draft the dice, and then the third phase is going to be an upgrade phase where you can upgrade stuff on your board, gain new stuff to kind of go in different directions in the game, and then you're just going to play 5 rounds of that. So I really liked my experience with this game. I went into the cabin weekend. I hadn't read the rules even before going out, so it took a while to actually to set everything up, read through the rules, check back on the rules again. And then this is one of those solo games where the solo mode is its own separate set of rules. Like, what I'm actually doing on my turn is pretty much the same, but there's a bot. They call him Johan. So you're basically playing against Johan, and the solo, like the whole rulebook is maybe 14, 15 pages, but the solo mode itself is like 5 or 6 pages. So the reason why this isn't higher on this list, the reason why this is only at number 4, is that I'm realizing more and more when I play these types of solo games that I don't like solo modes where I have to do a lot of work on behalf of a bot, especially if I'm having to go back to a rulebook and check, okay, if this happens, what does Johan do in this case? Okay, he does this, but then if that's not available, then instead he does this. Like, it's not quite flowchart. This isn't the Clockwork Prince from Oath, but there's still a lot of different steps that happen, and there's even an entire automa phase that only the bot gets that happens after the first phase that you as a player don't get. In one of the rounds, I started doing the second phase and realized, oh wait, I haven't done the automa phase yet for Johan because it's only for the bot and it only happens between phase 1 and 2. So it's like you're gonna have to have the rulebook out at least the first time you play it solo. You're probably gonna have the rulebook out the entire time and have to keep flipping back and forth, figuring out what Johan's doing when and which decision he makes. And then as it is, I'm sometimes having to refresh on other rules about just like my own actions that I'm taking. So it was a lot of work to actually get through playing this solo once. I'm really glad I did because I really enjoyed the game quite a bit, and I think I really want to play this now with 2, 3, or 4 players. I don't know if I'm going to really want to play with 5. That seems a bit excessive. I think it would make the game take quite a while, but we'll see. I don't really know enough about it yet, but there's a lot to like in this game. I mean, on the board, I should have mentioned a little more. So some of the spots you can go to are things like you can acquire these pea-plant cards, which basically have a point value and then some traits on them. And so this is where the whole idea of genotype comes into play. Is there's these traits, these genotypes, which are represented by combinations of letters in small, like lower and uppercase. I'm not trying to get too into this because it's probably not going to make a whole lot of sense, but there's these things on the board called Punnett squares, and I'm sure you'll see this on the B-roll that Dylan puts up, but there's these colored dice and there's these kind of little quadrants that say 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then there'll be an x-axis and a y-axis with the same letters either in lowercase or uppercase. And when you roll the dice, each of the dice in the game has 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the other 2 sides are this like novo mutations type thing that puts in a different column. But basically when you roll the dice, depending what values they show, that's going to determine where they go based on which letters in the axis correspond to the numbers in the quadrants. So if that didn't make sense, I don't want to get too much more into it because again, it's probably a little bit confusing, but a big thing is you're trying to, and you can change up the makeup, like you can put these little tiles that cover up the letters to change whether it's 2 capitals or 2 small letters instead of 1 of each to make it easier for you to meet your traits or maybe more difficult for your opponents to not meet their traits. So there's a whole thing where you're trying to draft the right dice for yourself, but you're trying to alter what the dice even get allocated to based on, again, those genotypes. And then each of the pea plant cards you have point values, and you're trying to meet the traits, cover them up to get these points from them. You can acquire tools through the game that give you abilities. You can get assistants that have ongoing abilities. There's changing values for things that you can upgrade throughout the game. There's all kinds of different paths you can take. You can acquire more workers. Everyone starts with, I think I said, was 2 or 3, and you can go up to 5 if you decide to get more workers. So there's all type of different directions you can go. A lot to like, very interesting. I felt like it was very thematic and educational. I felt like I was really learning about this, but it still felt like there was a lot more game there than I was expecting. So really enjoyed my time with Genotype. Again, it was a bit to get into. I don't think I'll be playing the solo mode again just because it was too much to manage Johan. I will say I lost. I think it was like 108 to 100 or something. So maybe I should go back and try to beat Johan or something. But anyway, Genotype, great game. We will definitely cover this more in depth on the channel at some point in the near future, probably in an Own It, Play It, Skip It. But yeah, great game. Highly recommend you check it out. And I had a great time with it. But I do think it'll be better with probably 2 to 4 players. That is Genotype. All right, so that was the bottom half. Now we're into the top half of my experiences with solo games this past weekend. We are going to get into number 3, which is a game I've talked about on the channel quite a bit before, and that is Sprawlopolis. But I had only played the Sprawlopolis base game, even though when I backed on Kickstarter, I got the Allopolis bundle, which came with like 6 or 7 expansions or something like that, including Agropolis, which was its own standalone game. So for the first time ever, I got to try one of the expansions, and I tried the Beaches expansion with it here. So very simple expansion. And again, I've talked about Sprawlopolis on the channel before, so I'm going to try not to get too much into the rules, but you basically have 18 cards. You're picking 3 at random. One side of them has goal cards, and then you're taking the other 15 cards on the other side that have these different routes and different types of terrain, shuffling them up, and then you're basically drawing 3. You have 3 cards on your turn. You play 1, and then you draw back up to 3 again, and you're going to be playing those 15 cards to create a city to try and meet the goals from the 3 cards that you turned over at the start. That's pretty much the game. Beaches comes with 4 cards. there's like a north beach, south beach, east beach, and west beach, and then each of those on the other side has another goal to fulfill as well. And all you do is incorporate this with the expansion with the base game is you shuffle those 4 beach cards. You flip one as the beach goal card, which is going to give you your 4th kind of scoring category to go along with the 3 from the base game. And then the other 3 like terrain cards or whatnot just get shuffled in with the other regular city cards. So throughout the game, you just have 4 goals instead of 3. But when these terrain cards come up, the beach ones, they specifically have a beach, and depending where it is, you'll have to put that card somewhere so that it counts as a border. And now let's say I lay down, let me just show you real quick. Let's say I lay down a card that has a beach on it. That card is basically showing that that is now the perimeter of my city, and that I can't build anything past there. So for example, you can see the city is here. I'll hold it up here. The city parts are here. Here's the beach and here's the water. So if I was building, everything would have to be below this line. I can't build anything that goes above this beach. So the beach cards as they come out are creating borders. So there's that added level of challenge because you're kind of closing in your city and you're trying to limit how far out you can actually build. And then you're also getting an additional scoring card. And for example, the one I got was like 10 points by default, -1 for every row between the north and south beach. So if you make like a big terrain, you have a whole bunch of rows, you're going to lose a lot of points. So I limited mine to, I think, 3 or 4 rows. So it was like a long stretched out city that didn't have much sort of like height or whatever if you're looking at a top-down view. So I got like 7 points for whatnot. So yeah, it's a very easy to incorporate expansion. Definitely added to my enjoyment of the game. And the reason I chose beaches first is because I had heard for a long time, most people had said it was probably the best expansion for the game, probably the easiest one to incorporate. Sprawlopolis never fails to disappoint. Really good game. I've mentioned before that I really only enjoy this solo. I tried it a couple times with 2 players and I didn't really like it much at all. Like, it really dropped off. I would never want to play it with 3 or 4. Absolutely not. But yeah, great solo game. Adding beaches to it made it even better. I probably will play with beaches most times from now on, and I look forward to trying out some of the other expansions as well. And the thing is, this game plays in like 15 or 20 minutes. I was like setting, water to boil to make my morning coffee and preparing my breakfast, and I walk over the table and put a card down, and I was kind of eating while I play. It's just kind of the ideal. Like, it was such a pleasant experience to play this. Yeah, great game, Sprawlopolis. Highly recommend it if you haven't played it. And just Button Shy as a company in general, Button Shy Games deserve a lot of credit for just their whole business model and how they're able to sort of extract so much out of, again, like a little wallet-sized package like this with rules that are basically a few sentences long. It just continues to surprise me every time. Excellent, excellent game. And yeah, kind of pleasantly surprised that out of the 6 I played, that tiny little game there was number 3 for me for this past weekend. Number 2 on the list is a game that Dylan has spoken about on the channel. I have not yet. It's a game that we both own that I had only played so far as a 2-player game, but I had played it, I think, 4 or 5 times before, and I brought it out specifically to try it out solo and with the expansion that comes in the box. That is Café. So, I know you might be thinking, no, it's Café. No. I speak Portuguese. It's Café, trust me. It's published by Pythagoras, which is a Portuguese publisher. The designers are listed as Rola e Costa. Those are their last names, I imagine. I imagine it's Marina Costa, who also did the artwork. Either way, this is a great game. Plays 1 to 4 players in about half an hour. Game plays over 8 rounds. There's 4 different types of coffee in the game. They each have their own. There's reasons why these colors represent different types of coffee, but I just know them as like red, yellow, brown, and green are the 4 colors of coffee cubes that you can get in the game. And you're basically laying cards. It's a tableau building game, tableau engine builder, I would say, where you're laying cards over top of each other. You're acquiring a new card every turn, adding it to your tableau, and these cards are divided in 6 little sections. So some of the sections will be blank, and other ones will have like an icon on them that represents either like a type of bean that you can produce, or a location where you can perhaps dry beans or roast beans. There's little shops that you can deliver goods to. The expansion comes with some other iconography too for different options. But basically on your turn, you're going to flip some options over from the deck, and depending on player count, I think it's 1 more card than the number of players playing. You're going to pick one of those cards, add it to your tableau, and you always have to cover at least 2 little sections on any part of your tableau. So sometimes you're going to be covering, maybe you played a card last round and now you're covering up 2 of the 6 spots on that card. So you just played that card and now you're covering up a third of it. And the next turn you're having to cover up something else. So I like the fact that this ended up being number 2 right after Sprawlopolis, because I want to compare the two a little bit because there's a lot of that same overlapping, but in Sprawlopolis you don't have to. In Sprawlopolis, you could play the entire game and never overlap any cards and just place them all next to each other so that the roots connect. And it'll be a bigger board. Or you can overlap if you want, but the choice is yours. In Café, you have to, every single turn, cover at least 2 spaces anywhere on there. So it is really, really tough because you're always kind of forced to break or modify your engine or parts of your board into a way that, like, it never feels good. Like, even if you got the card you want and you're like, this is awesome, I'm going to put it here, sometimes you're like, I don't want to cover up anything. Like, everywhere I can put this that is a legal placement sucks because I'm covering up something else that was really helpful. Basically, then throughout the game, after you place your card, you take actions based on the number of coffee cups you have on the board. So you're taking actions, and you start. It's kind of the flow of coffee. So you start by A, producing beans, B, drying them, C, roasting them, and D, delivering them. So you either deliver goods to your own warehouse for your own endgame points, or you deliver goods to the different shops that you have on your board to fulfill kind of recipe requirements. Like this one says maybe it needs 2 brown cubes and 1 green cube, and if you do that, then it'll get 3 points at the end of the game, or whatever. Awesome game. Really enjoyed it already as a 2-player game. I felt when I played it that I wouldn't, not that I wouldn't want to play with more than 2, but there would be nothing really to gain by adding a 3rd or 4th player. To me, 2 seemed like the sweet spot, but man, this was really good solo too. It played so quickly. Again, it's 8 rounds, but you're never waiting for anyone. So it's like 8 rounds of basically flip a couple cards, pick the one that you want to keep, and then take the actions that you're able to take based on how many actions you can take on your board. Second round, take a card, take your actions, etc. And you're just trying to see how high of a score you can get. So I think I scored like 26 or something like that, which, you know, in the rulebook they always have their, like, here's your scoring scale to let you know how you did. So I was playing solo. I felt like, oh, I have all the time in the world. I can take my time. I'm not, you know, like holding up the game. I'll try and do really well. The range for like good is like 23 to 29. So I was like kind of in, I didn't even get great or whatever. I think the scoring scale says like, I think the last category is like 40 plus, says you did amazing or something. So I'm way far off still. I will say that this box comes with the Espresso expansion. And yes, I know the actual word is espresso, E-S, it's not an X, but they do, the expansion is spelled that way, so that's why I said it that way. So don't give me a hard time about saying espresso. I know the coffee is espresso. But the expansion comes with 8 new cards that you can mix in, and there's 4 different icons that come in. So there's like the pastel de nata, the dessert, for those of you who are familiar with it. There's some spots that have like 2 of the same bean types, so you can produce more. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. I really enjoy this game. I was really impressed by how much I enjoyed it solo, and adding in the expansion was so easy and just seamless, and it feels like the type of game where, like, now when I know I'm going to need a solo game, like, this is going to be one of my go-tos. This is going to be up there now with things like Sprawlopolis that's like, yeah, it's a bigger box than Sprawlopolis, but there's a lot to think about here, and it's a really tough, kind of brain-burning game. The fact that you're, again, kind of breaking things down and rebuilding and twisting your engine as you go, and the game always feels like you wish you could have done better by the end. You never accomplish. Like, it's a very tight game. A lot to like about it here. Highly recommend you try it out. That is Café. All right, now on to my number 1 solo game experience this past weekend. So this is a big one, game I had never played before at any player count. You know what, I won't stall anymore. I'll just pull this beast right onto camera. This is Ark Nova. So for those of you who, I don't know if it's possible to not be familiar with this game. This feels like the hottest game of the last however many years. This game shot, I think it's already in the Board Game Geek top 10, or if not, last time I checked, I think it was like 11 or 12 or something like that. But this game just got released in Europe at the end of 2021, only made its way to North America in 2022, so it's still fairly new, but I think, as far as I can remember, this is the fastest rise up the Board Game Geek charts that I can ever personally remember since I've been in the hobby, or at least since I've been following, you know, Board Game Geek and the rankings and that kind of thing. And I remember, I'm always skeptical of when games shoot up the rankings, because we've talked about a lot of other games on the channel that are in the top 50 or top 100 that we appreciate as being good games, but maybe not for us, or we think, yeah, they're overrated. Like, why is that in the top 50 or whatever? And so I went into this very skeptical. The other reason why I went into it very skeptical is because the main game it had been compared to a lot before its release, or when it first came out and people were playing it, was everyone was comparing it to Terraforming Mars. Which, if you're familiar with, if you've watched our channel before, you might know, I don't dislike Terraforming Mars, but I'm kind of just indifferent towards it. Like, it's fine, I would agree to play it happily, but I'm never going to be the one to request to play it. I think it's a bit too long for what it is, and I get a bit frustrated sometimes with, you know, how some of the cards don't feel all that interesting to me. It just feels like you're matching up tags. And anyways, this isn't a video talking about Terraforming Mars, but so I was very skeptical because of these comparisons. But we needed to play this game, so it plays 1 to 4 players. This is a first-time designer, by the way. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Matthias Viga, I believe. And this is published by Feuerlandspiel in Europe and Capstone here in North America. So what I will say before I go any further, because I don't want to forget, is that the solo mode for this was way more enjoyable and easy to play than the solo mode that I talked about in Genotype. And this is the type of solo mode that I typically like in games, where you're not... Like, if I am going to be managing a bot, I don't mind if it's just like flip a card, do what the card says, and move on, and if it's really, really quick. But in this, there wasn't even a bot. You're just playing... So, here, now I'll rewind and give you an overview of the game before I get more into the solo, but you're basically building up this zoo. You have your own map where you're building up. There's a board in the middle of the table where cards come out that players are basically going to be, potentially drawing cards from to gain into their hand or to place into their little tableau or whatnot. What else do I even gather here? I mean, there's an appeal track and a conservation track. So there's 2 different types of points you can score throughout the game, and they start on opposite ends, and they're basically tracks that are going to go towards each other. And the end of the game is going to trigger when any one player's appeal marker crosses or meets their conservation marker. So as soon as that happens, it's going to trigger the end of the game, and whoever did that doesn't get another turn, but all the other players get one more turn, and then you add up your scores. So a lot of the time, your final score is going to be in the negative, because your final score, again, if your appeal marker doesn't even get to your conservation marker, chances are you're going to score in the negative. If they reach each other or pass, and you have other opportunities to kind of get some additional points right at the end, you might end up with a positive score. So, but this is a game that's all about the cards. There's this massive deck of cards. I think it's 212 cards or something. Every single one is unique. And that kind of scared me off of the game a little bit too, because obviously with games where there's that many cards and they're all unique, there's a very steep learning curve. There's obviously a high element of randomness in terms of like, okay, I got this card and there's however many cards in that deck that might synergize, that I might be able to get a combo going. But if there's 200 plus cards in that deck, and there's, let's say, 5 cards out there or 8 cards out there that are going to work well with this, what are the odds I'm going to get to those? And what if my opponent gets a bunch of their combos and I don't get many of mine? So it is very reliant on card combos and synergies, but the game, you don't win or lose by that. There's other, paths to take. If you're not getting the card synergies, maybe you go a different route in the game and you try and go more for conservation points. Like a lot of the appeal points you get for getting people to be attracted to coming to your zoo are from playing animals. People say, oh, I want to go see that animal. I want to go see this thing at the zoo. But then the conservation points come from things like, releasing animals to the wild, or forming partnerships with other zoos across the world, or, increasing your capabilities for these better actions. And okay, speaking of actions, I should have mentioned this before. Very interesting action selection thing in this game where you have 5 different actions you can take. There's the basic version, and then throughout the game you can upgrade them to an upgraded kind of advanced side. But they range from strength 1 through 5. You have this thing on your board, and every turn when you pick an action, depending where that action card is located, let's say I pick the cards action and it's in slot 4, then I'm taking a strength 4 card action. So every action you take, depending which of your 5 slots it's in, has a different effect or different strength level. It does more the further it is. But let's say whatever card, let's say I took the one that was in slot 4, I'm going to slide that then into slot 1 and push the other ones to the right. So the longer you don't use an action, it slides to the higher strength spots and it gets more powerful. And the more you use an action, it keeps going back the line and becomes strength 1 or strength 2. So it's this balance of the whole game. You're trying to find out, as often as possible, you can take strength 4 and 5 actions. Those are going to be the best. But sometimes you need to take the action that's further down, that's weaker. And that's the whole efficiency puzzle you're trying to figure out. But there's these breaks that happen throughout the game, and after every break you have to discard down to 3 cards, and there's some other little things that happen in the game. And there's things that when you play a card or you do this thing, it'll say advance the break token by 2 or advance the break token by this or whatnot. And in the solo mode, it just says ignore whenever it says to advance these. The breaks just happen automatically. It's like after you, as the solo player, you take 6 turns, then there's a break. Then you take 5 turns, then there's a break. Then you take 4 turns, there's a break, etc. And then once you've taken, then you take that break, then you take your last 2 turns, and then the game ends. So you know right from the start exactly how many turns you're getting in Ark Nova. You know exactly when the breaks are coming. So when you play it solo, it's predictable, and it's something that you can kind of math out and figure out the timing in advance. So it does play differently in that sense. Whereas when you're playing with multiple players, people can be, you know, speeding up, like getting to breaks sooner. The game can end or like at different times depending on if you've actually, like, depending who actually gets that conservation and appeal track to meet. So very interesting stuff there. I played, and when you play solo, it's just at the end, if you have at least 0, like if you're in the positive, you win, or if you're negative, you lose. I ended with -3, so I just barely lost. This game was, I really enjoyed my experience playing with it. I don't know yet, like, it was pretty overwhelming to learn this game, set it up, going back to the rules. Like, it took a long time to play through it solo, if I'm being honest, like at least 3 or 4 hours. I was definitely taking my time, looking at all the cards, trying to really soak it in. So I don't know yet my final opinion on this game. It's going to take quite a few plays before I know where I land. Definitely want to try it with at least 2 players and maybe even 3. Don't know if I don't want to play it with 4. I'm kind of worried how long the game would take. Very brain burnery. And the last thing I'll say about it is that I think where my enjoyment, like what's going to end up making or breaking this game for me, or what's going to determine how much I like it, is going to be with the deck of cards. Because again, you only get to keep 3 when those breaks happen, and there's such a big stack of cards. And if I keep playing this over and over and it keeps seeming like, oh, well, whoever got luckiest with the cards, whoever got the best synergies wins, that might affect my enjoyment of it. Or if I play and see like, there's not as many interesting card abilities as I thought, that might also affect my enjoyment. But yeah, there's all kinds of maps you can play with. There's tons of replay value in the box, and obviously tons left for me to explore. We'll definitely be talking about this on the channel again. But part of the reason why this ends up being my #1 is not only my enjoyment of just discovering a new game, but I think this is just going to be a kind of memorable one for me. Like years from now, like what if Ark Nova is one day like the #1 game on BGG, or one day I like it even more. I'm always going to remember when I like took it out to the cabin and like undertook this beast of a game and learned it and played it all by myself solo the first time. So really enjoyed my experience learning it for the first time. And again, we will talk about it again on the channel some other day. So that was Ark Nova. So those were the 6 games I played this past weekend at the cabin. Curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think of these 6? Have you played these? Anything that stuck out about anything I mentioned about them? Any solo games you would recommend? Again, I mentioned like the Imperium games I want to play. I want to play Nemo's War. I have Dylan's copy of Arkham Horror, the card game, which I've been meaning to try. Legacy of Dragonholt I still haven't tried. Like I have all kinds of ones at home and ones on my list that I'm meaning to try. So if you have any others that you'd like to see us talk about in future videos or whatnot, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.